Decentralized finance is highly dependent on liquidity providers who are basically participants of the platform that are putting their capital to work in exchange for some type of yield, some type of benefit. And that's exactly what I did. Here in the video, I'll show you how I supplied liquidity into a V3, a concentrated liquidity DEX. I did it as an experiment, and we'll glance at the position, which is wildly out of range right now. And it was a good learning experience. If you're not that familiar with V3 or concentrated liquidity, I think you're really going to like this video. But it all comes down to, as a DeFi user, it all comes down to, should you supply liquidity or should you do something else with your crypto? Are the risks too great? Is the APR high enough? Or are there simply better opportunities elsewhere? That's what we're going to talk about and what I'll show you in this video. Welcome, everybody. Joe here from Dead Cat Crypto here on the KPOD network. It's a collaboration between Scott Bella and myself to bring you the best consumer crypto content you're going to find anywhere on YouTube. So why don't you subscribe down below, get involved in the channel. We do live streams from time to time and also educational videos like this one. I know I'm usually on my own channel over there on Dead Cat Crypto, but I really like bringing you guys these deep dives that I'm dropping over here on the KPOD. This one's about concentrated liquidity, and I am no expert. I dabble here and there with some yield opportunities, but I've largely pumped the brakes the last year. I don't like my tokens locked up. I don't like depositing my tokens in smart contracts, but I took a low risk, as you'll see, a low risk for me. It might be different for you. And it didn't turn out great, but it was a good way to understand how concentrated liquidity works. We'll take a look at the position, and then I'll walk you through the experiment that I did, and we'll analyze the results and see if that was the best decision for me and my funds, or if there was a better option out there that I overlooked. We'll start the adventure here on Base Chain. This is Treble. It's a brand new DEX. I like it. I listened to a couple of their calls. I was in the Telegram asking questions. I like being first, so I decided, what the hell, let me LP. And it's a pretty good UI, no complaints at all. Let me see if I can find my position. So up here, I can go to pools, and there aren't that many pools. It's a relatively new DEX, like I said. And I did a video on this. If you want to check that out, I'll link it down below. It's a short video comparing Alien Base and Treble Swap, two smaller DEXs on Base. I'll click my pools. See, my only complaint about the UI is that right here on the top left, my pools should automatically, but they're not quite there yet. I'll click my pools, and here you go. And you could see it's out of range, which means I'm not collecting any fees on this pool as if I were in a regular V2 pool where I would be collecting fees for whatever the price may be. But I have about $800 TVL. I collected $40 in fees. That's over about a month, which is not that great, right? What is that, like 6%? Not a great yield. I supplied liquidity with two tokens that I already had. I didn't go out and buy them just for the sake of LPing. And I said, okay, no matter how these prices change, and my position's going to change, I'm okay with it because I don't mind having either. If the price of ETH dips, my position is basically going to automatically buy ETH, if you want to think of it that way. If ETH goes up in relation to USDC, it's going to automatically sell ETH into the stablecoin, which I also don't mind. But you could see by this slider, my position, which was about 50-50, is now completely in ETH because the price went down. Over here's the range that I supplied. At the time, the APR was like 500%, and we'll see it. I have a slide show for you so we could walk through this experiment, but I just wanted to show you what the position actually looks like. Just to give you an idea, this was my range, right? I started here, about 3,200 all the way down to about 2,400. The price was always in that range, so I was collecting fees all this time. On February 25th, it dropped out of range, only returned for hours, dropped out of range again, and then back in range for a couple hours. Now I'm way out of range. What that means is I'm not collecting liquidity. And if I supply liquidity in a more narrow range, my liquidity is going to be used to facilitate swaps more, if you want to think of it that way, which means I should get a higher APR than someone with a wider range. In other words, if I supplied liquidity in this nice tight range here, even though it drops out of range, I would have accumulated a lot more fees than if my liquidity was set like this. Okay, so the idea with concentrated liquidity is you got to be really good at predicting the price movement. That way you can decide how wide or how narrow to supply liquidity. It's not like V2 where you're supplying liquidity over the entire range of prices, 0 to infinity. It's not like that. It's a more efficient way for DEXs, for AMMs, to use the liquidity provided by users. Does it get volatile? Yes, but there's a risk reward to everything, and I'm going to show you the risk that I took right now. This is actually a slideshow that I prepared for you guys, so bear with me. I want to show you the experiment from start to finish. We just looked at the ETH chart, and it's sideways, and I used a purple box to show the range in which my liquidity was set. This is a bar chart where this purple line is the current price of ETH. This is from February 6th. This is when I started the position. And you could see the range for which I supplied liquidity is in blue. Anything to the right of the blue or the left of the blue means I'm out of range. So I started with $486 in ETH. It was about 0.18. No, sorry, it was 0.172 ETH. You could see right here. And $500 in USDC made up the other half of the liquidity. So the total amount that I supplied was about $986, and my estimated APR was 47%. Okay, if I made the liquidity position narrower, that number would have gone up. I wasn't comfortable with that. I didn't want to have to check the position every 6 hours or 4 hours. I wanted to set it and forget it. So I was happy with this 47%. So here's my position, and it's in range to start. Great. I haven't collected any fees yet, but the price of ETH did go up. But as I was taking these screenshots, so you could see the TVL is showing 1,000, where it was a little less than that before. But I'm happy. It's in range. Like I said, set it and forget it. 20 days later, right? I hadn't checked the position for 20 days, but I noticed on my CoinGecko that my ETH had dropped. Well, what happened? It did drop. It was slightly below the 24.89. Now I go to the position, it's showing out of range. My TVL is still worth kind of close what I put in, but I'm not collecting any fees. I did collect some fees up until that point. It was 20 days, so it's not terrible. 20 days, $41 in fees. The $41.53 in fees, if that were to continue, right? This is only 20 days or so. If that were to continue for the whole year, that's about a 75% APR, 80% APR, something like that. I'd be really happy with that. But I can't be happy with that because my liquidity, my LP position's out of range. This $41.53 basically freezes until the pair starts trading in this range. But right here, the price of ETH is about $50 below the 24.89. I left it alone to give it a chance to get back into range naturally. And you could see, because it went out of range on the low end, my $500 in USDC was converted into ETH. Instead of having 0.17 ETH, I've got 0.36. It's almost the equivalent of just buying the dip. It's kind of the equivalent. So that's why I really wasn't that worried about it. But obviously it's pointless to supply liquidity if you're not collecting fees for your trouble. Now, March 3rd, this is when I plan to close the position. This is actually when I set up this slideshow, and my liquidity position has dropped to $843. So I took about $150 hit here. My fees actually went down because I guess my fees are in the DEX token, and that token is fluctuating. I did not ever collect the fees. And you could see here on the right where it says current price, I'm pretty far from my safe range, right? The blue. Each one of these bands is representing the amount of liquidity at that range. I'm at that price and none of it is mine. That's why I'm not collecting any fees, people. So I told you I was okay with the risk here, but we have to keep a couple things in mind. Number one, the APR has to be, the price has to be right. The APR has to incentivize me just enough to kind of ignore or deal with the risks. And what are the risks? Well, you just saw this kind of V3 impermanent loss where your position gets out of range and you stop collecting fees. It needs to be monitored all the time. If you withdraw and then deposit back the LP at the new range that you're comfortable with, you might be incurring taxable events depending on where you live. The other thing is when you provide liquidity, the tokens are no longer yours. You're giving up the tokens, you're depositing them in the smart contract in exchange for this APR. I was okay with it only because I didn't really care which way the price moved on the ETH. If it went down, you saw what happened. My USDC automatically converted. In order to compensate for that, all I did was eliminate one of my limit buys from Coinbase that was going to buy, around 2100, 2200 anyway. So it effectively became my dip buying purchase. If the ETH moved the other way and went out of range on the high end, well, it would have been like selling that ETH at a profit because I did scoop it up around 2200. I was okay with either outcome. Make sure when you do this, you're okay with all the possible outcomes as well. But right now we're going to look at what else I gave up. What were the trade-offs that maybe I wasn't thinking about, and whether or not this was the right move or whether I should have done something else with my ETH. Let's summarize the experiment with these slides. We're going to look at where we started, we're going to look at where we ended, and then determine if it was the right move. So my opening position, I had $500 in USDC and I had 0.172 ETH. They were roughly 50-50 for a grand total of $986. I deposited this in the smart contract, the LP, and I hope for the best. Fast forward to March 3rd, my final position with ETH taking a hit at $22.95. That's my whole position because I no longer have USDC. It's worth $8.26, but I got $41 in rewards. That counts for something for a grand total of $867. So about $120 difference here. But I didn't have to LP. So let's look at what it would look like if I never bothered to LP. I just held the ETH and the USDC in my wallet. ETH still would be $22.95. I would still have the 500 USDC, assuming I didn't do anything crazy. But my ETH devalued, right? $3.94 instead of $4.86. That's just simply due to price action for a grand total of $8.94. So I would have came out $27 better had I just done absolutely nothing, right? But I did LP. So my withdrawn position is now 0.36 in ETH. I'm not that happy that ETH worked against me. I would have preferred that it traded sideways in that nice purple box that I showed you on TradingView so I could collect fees forever. But like I said, it's kind of like buying the dip here, and I don't mind buying up ETH dips at this point. I do think it's a pretty solid token to hold if you're going to be in crypto at all. So effectively, I bought 0.19 ETH somewhere between the price it is on March 3rd and the price it was when I initially LP'd. So it was kind of like buying ETH at $25.60 for $500. So am I happy that ETH went down? Of course not. Am I devastated? Definitely not. When you play in this game, you got to have thick skin. You got to have some tolerance for volatility. I don't mind the volatility. There's a pretty good chance that ETH does rebound. I bought it at $25.60. I'm going to withdraw that position and redeposit it at a different range. I'll post that somewhere so you could check it out, probably my Telegram, which I'll link down below. You could join and we'll monitor this. Another good DeFi experiment. I did one years ago on impermanent loss on Osmosis. It got a ton of views, a ton of interest. And just remember that when you LP, keep track so you can see if it was the right move. right? And then you could decide what your trade-offs were. You could decide if you should have done something else. And hopefully all that learning informs your future decisions. Be careful out there. It is the wild, wild west. See you later.